They did actually originally cast Michael Jordan to be Ethan.
Ethan Hunt.
I almost said Ethan Hawke again.
Hello, you are listening to Off Radar, It's a Movie podcast. I'm James Smith, a professional film and video editor.
I'm James Eatock, a freelance writer and illustrator specialising in 1980s cartoons.
And I'm Neil Brock, aka Nige, the man with two names, former film journalist and currently working in the games industry.
Each week, one of us picks a movie that all three of us either haven't seen in many years or in some cases haven't seen at all.
We each watch the chosen movie, return to the microphone and let you all know exactly what we thought of it.
I'd never really had any interest in watching it and I was proved absolutely right.
I think it's amazing. I really, really love this film.
The film's still a pile of steaming dog shit.
If you fancy joining in and suggesting a movie for us to watch, why not tweet us at Off Radar Podcast
or email us on offradarpod@gmail.com.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, share, and by all means, leave a review.
For now, strap in, turn the volume up, and let's go Off Radar. I just need a really quick wee-wee, then we'll crack on.
I need to do a wee-wee here.
I did my wee-wee.
Hello.
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 There we go. I'm James Smith, and what do I normally say? Welcome to Off Radar.
Yes.
I've only done about 50 of these. Yeah. Welcome to Off Radar. I am James Smith. I'm joined by James Eatock.
Hello.
Again, and Neil Brock.
Hello.
Oh, he's done the thing.
Hello. See what I did? Straight.
But we call him Nige.
Hi.
Oh, you're not going to do that again. All right, fine.
It's too much.
Today, we're back for another episode. This is how it works. We basically, each week, we either pick a film or we get someone to suggest one from you guys. We go away, watch it, rate and review that film, and then rate it right at the end of the episode out of 10. Today was actually a film I picked, probably a little bit tactically with the whatever number they're up to, 6, 7.
Yeah, both myself and Eatock are just like,
I don't know. The fact they call them different names each time, so it confuses you. It's like, so anyway, Mission Impossible, the first one, which came out in 1996, and obviously has spawned a whole franchise of films since. Had you guys seen this film before we did it for the pod?
Sorry, I was just counting how many Mission Impossible films there are. The latest one will be the 8th.
8th?
So,
wow.
Yeah, which I absolutely cannot believe. I saw this many years ago, I would say, in probably the late 90s. I think I first saw it on, I'm going to say VHS as well, even though this was the last ever film released on Betamax. So we saw
Was it really?
There, yeah.
That's a great bit of trivia. Bloody
Instant
hell.
trivia.
Gone early. So I had seen it, but I hadn't actually watched it again in a really long time. I'm going to say so at least sort of 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, wow. Eatock, you seen this one before?
Yeah, I've seen it before, but my experience with it was very different to Nige. I didn't watch it on VHS. I watched it on DVD. But here's the funny thing: I saw Mission Impossible 2 first because I was such a huge John Woo fan, and we all like Tom Cruise, and I was like, oh, John Woo's directing, and it was so James Eatock in what? 22 years old. 22, I guess I was in 2000. Think about how very 2000, I think it's 2000, Mission Impossible 2 is. It's so, you could never make it. You could watch that film and immediately know what year it's from. It
is 2000, yeah.
Oh, there you go. It's so of its time. And I remember thinking it was like the most incredible film. The trailer for it was really good, actually. And then years later, when I'd kind of got over that experience, I went and watched Mission Impossible, the first one, and I was like, oh, there we go. I can't say too much about it.
No, and thank you for listening to Off Radar. Yeah, well, I was like you, Nigel. I saw it on VHS as well, and yeah, I kind of watched it just through the cruise appeal, as they call it, or cruise control, or whatever it is.
The what?
I think that's Speed 2 you're talking about.
God, yeah. Now that is a film. Speed 2. Yeah, so
Etoch looks very confused.
I was like, well, I don't understand this cruise control.
I think I just made it up. I think there was a thing called cruise control, but just because of Cruise's control on all his films.
Random. I was like, did I miss something? Was this called Mission Impossible Cruise Control?
It was a combo, a slash between this and Speed 2. Yeah, so I also saw it on VHS. And then kind of like you went to the cinema, or like probably both of you guys went to the cinema really excited to watch the second one.
I saw the second one at the cinema as well.
And I was just like, what the fuck? This is quite a different film to the only one that I'd seen. So this one, first one, Mission Impossible, written by Bruce Geller, David Kopp, who I swear we've talked about before, David Kopp.
David Co-op.
I think you just went down the co-op and got yourself a sausage roll.
David Co-op.
So David Co-op has actually written Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which is obviously the latest indie film. He was also involved in Ghost Town, which was obviously that Ricky Gervais film from a few years ago.
That's different.
He also did the screenplay for Crystal Skull, which we should probably move on from. But things like Panic Room as well, The Shadow, which is something we discussed briefly, Kalito's Way, Jurassic Park. So there's a few pretty major films, although some of them obviously adaptations, and this likewise is an adaptation from the TV show.
A very well-known TV show. And also written by Stephen Zalian, directed by Brian De Palma.
Which I forgot. I can't believe it.
I forgot that. And I think with him, obviously there's a few films that kind of come to my mind straight away, and this wasn't one of them. So Carrie, Scarface, Untouchables, Kalito's Way.
Scarface and Kalito's Way are two of my favourite movies, and I'm like, is this podcast, is it just constantly reminding me of directors that if someone says who's your favourite director, I don't immediately go to, like Scorsese and Brian De Palma?
It doesn't. I always forget about Brian De Palma, just generally for some reason.
You can see why he was hired for this, though. I want to state that off the bat. You can see why he was hired, because they were like, who does real great tension really fucking good? And it's De Palma.
The interesting thing was he actually got offered Mission Impossible 2 as well, but turned it down.
Oh, wow. That would have been a very different film.
It's funny, he did Casualties of War, which we mentioned in a previous podcast, Michael J. Fox film.
Wow.
But this, you would, looking at his filmography, you would say this is Brian De Palma's last good film. And you would and he only did it really for the money. It was actually Robert Altman who was first approached, because it was Tom Cruise and a guy called Wagner. I can't remember.
Robert Wagner?
You would think it might be
Wagbo.
Robert Wagner. No, it's
Wagner, not Wagbo.
Wagner. Paula Wagner, apparently, she formed this production company with Tom Cruise, and this was their first sort of major production that they wanted to do, and they managed to get a decent budget for it. And I think Tom Cruise, rather than taking quite a large fee for starring in it, as he rightly would at that time of his career, took a percentage of the box office, which was a rather clever thing, because
which I'm sure he did all right.
470 million from
so this was his first
budget.
Producing role before, because obviously Cruise has now become not just a film star but an exec and a producer, and those Mission Impossible films are his baby now.
That's true.
I don't know if it was his first one. It was certainly the first one that production company did, because I think we've discussed this on previous episodes, how someone can just be an executive producer because they're basically the star. Do they actually do anything? That's another question entirely. But this was something where it came from sort of that actual partnership, and
the partnership of the two of them. Oh, interesting. And it's also, it feels like, other than Top Gun, this is almost his intro into the action genre a little bit, because before this it was
Days of Thunder,
The Firm and stuff like that.
It was never,
Rain Man. It was very different to
A Few Good Men
he is now. Looking
at the film, say the Firm, for instance, he's just a normal person, or he's a student in Risky Business, or in Rain Man, for instance. He was quite a youngish character. I think it was around this period that he first really started developing rather than a young male, it was a more formed adult, I suppose. I think he was in his mid-30s when he'd done this. He'd just done Far and Away, which wasn't great, sort of a few years previous. Interview with the Vampire, which was really kind of convention breaking for him, something completely different. And then I think that was the point where he said, you know what, I'm going to kind of make the films that I want to be in. and that's part of the reason why he formed that production company. And sort of since then, the majority of the films that he's done, so like he actually produced The Others, which is something we discussed previously as well. But Vanilla Sky, Minority Report, Last Samurai, War of the Worlds, and there's a few others in between that he didn't star in, but it was predominantly so he had a company that trusted him to create the films he wanted to make.
And he continues to do so. And just one last thing on Tom Cruise. We've obviously we spoke about him in 2 previous episodes, which please go and check out: Top Gun Maverick and Edge of Tomorrow. So this is our 3rd Cruise adventure, as well as the man himself. It also stars Emmanuelle Béart.
Hey, Bird.
And Sean Reno, who you'll know from probably most, obviously Leon, John Voight, Ving Rhames, who, other than the other actors in this film, don't really appear in the rest of the franchise very much, whereas Ving Rhames has come back.
Yeah, became like a stalwart of the franchise.
Exactly. Whereas most of the others have not, and
most of them died,
none of
to
them
be
are.
Fair, so that's probably why.
Oh, damn it. And then also Kristen Scott Thomas, Vanessa Redgrave as well, also in the film. So I attempt to do a synopsis of this one as I picked it. Bear with me, this is going to be quite top level.
This is going to be quite the impossible mission for you, Smith.
It is, but I choose to accept it. Here we go. Tom Cruise plays Ethan Hunt, who is a young secret agent who, with his team, go on a mission in Prague to stop a Russian agent from stealing a list. On that list, it contains the identities of covert agents worldwide. However, the mission goes wrong, the list is stolen, then all of his team are brutally killed. Hunt is the sole survivor, along with who he thinks is about to steal the list. Hunt realises that another team were present on the job, and it was a setup to try and lure out the mole. Hunt is then framed as being responsible for the betrayal, and he becomes a wanted man and goes on the run.
John Voight's character plays Jim Phelps, which is the only returning character from the TV series.
That's right,
kind of ties it together.
Oh, my goodness, I forgot about that.
But I think, well, as we see through the film, I think Ethan Hawke is a very, very capable agent.
Ethan Hunt.
Ethan Hunt.
Did you know that they really wanted to call him Mike in the original film?
Oh, Smith, come on.
That took a while for you to get that.
Well, I was like Mike Hawke, because I thought it was about Ethan
Mike Hawke, yeah.
And Ethan Hunt will be your point man, as usual. He is now in Kiev and will rendezvous in Prague at a safe house of your choosing. As always, should you or any member of your IM force be caught or killed, the Secretary will disavow all knowledge of your actions. This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Good luck, Jim.
Actually, the very beginning of this film actually feels like the original show, which I've not really seen much of, but you've seen, I've kind of seen clips on YouTube and stuff, and that first bit where Phelps, did you say?
Yeah, Jim Phelps.
Yeah, he's on the plane and he's getting the transmission through.
He gets like a little cassette tape that he puts into the side of the chair, which is like, what year are we in? And it's like, it's 1996.
It looks and feels 60s or 70s. And it does. That first even 15, 20 minutes of the film feels like it's going to be like an episode of Mission Impossible, the TV show.
What they originally sort of pitched to a lot of the people who were in the original TV show was to bring them back and have them basically die quite early in the film. Like Martin Landau, people like that who, as said, were in that original TV show. But instead, what they obviously do, if you watch the film, is they kind of bring together a cast of, I would say, fairly well-known actors and actresses. So Kristen Scott Thomas, who hadn't done... who did like 4 Weddings not too long before, and I think was doing English Patient around the same time. Emilio Estevez, who at that period is just off the back of sort of the Young Guns. I think he may have just done the first Mighty Ducks film, so his star was waning a little bit. But even so, you see Emilio Estevez part of this, and you think, oh, he's part of the gang. He's going to be in this film a long way through. But yeah, things go horribly wrong, and cast members that you think are going to be in the film for the long haul don't make it past the first sort of 20 minutes or so. And I remember Kristen Scott Thomas actually said, oh, I die after page 25 of the script, but at least I die in Tom Cruise's arms, which is kind of a nice way of looking at it. But yeah, and I think for me, when I first watched the film, that was a massive shock to see Emilio Estevez killed off really early in this film, because they're at this kind of your classic spy black tie event. They've all got like little gadgets on, like glasses that can see things and all sorts of different things like that. A spray on this guy's back of his head so they can see where he's moving at all times. But things just go calamitously wrong.
Abort! Do you read me?
Just going back to the opening titles, you said about the cold opening with the opening scene.
Yeah, it's got like a burning fuse, hasn't it?
Yeah, and then we get the proper titles, and it's like, oh, this is like. I was thinking to myself, you don't really get that with movies anymore, where you get a good old fashioned movie, either opening titles or cold opening, like a Bond film. Bond films always had that opening scene,
and then the credits, or
the credits.
Indiana Jones,
another one. Yeah,
the credits are really, really weird in that they show loads of clips from the film in the opening credits, which I've never seen in any film.
No, you're right. That's actually a very good point.
It does feel like a TV show, though. That
you see a bunch of spoilers in the opening credits.
You see, I think, the scene where like Christian Scott Thomas gets stabbed, they show that bit, but you can't see her face. You're like, really? Someone's going to get stabbed. Weird little things like that. And it's like, So going back to watch it, you realise how sort of prominent those bits are. It's almost like a cut of a trailer rather than... But I didn't get that. I didn't get that it was like the intro of it, like a TV show, which is exactly what it's trying to be.
The other interesting thing with that start of the film, just in general, is it's set in Prague as well. And, so many Hollywood films, especially around that time, we were so used to New York and maybe London a little bit, which we obviously get to later in the film. So there's quite a different feel. It's all misty and very European cobbled streets.
At times I'm watching this thinking, this feels a bit like London, the way you get that. It's beautifully shot, because you get like the kind of, if I remember rightly, like the streets that look like they've been recently rained on or something, so it's like you get those reflections of the night. It's it's really beautifully shot.
And that's like straight off. You think Brian De Palma's influence on the film is immediate. Like from the cinematography, like you're saying, but also like from some of the cameras angles, like big close-ups, and then you'll get a big, massive wide, and they're often like kind of on the piss a bit, or like almost wonky shots, which is quite different for what this series has now become, which is obviously quite a conventional or in crazy kind of massive blockbuster.
But going back to the you were saying about setting it in Prague, it's a great point, because I guess with spy thrillers and stuff, you're so used to it being in New York, or I don't know, typical. Prague didn't feel like an obvious location, I guess, back in 1996.
This was the first Hollywood film to be shot in Prague, so obviously it come out of obviously the Czech Republic, very different place in the 80s and 90s. The film was one of the first Hollywood features to be both set and shot in contemporary Prague.
Wow.
So it really, I think it was Brian De Palma himself who kind of pushed for it, for something, as you say, a bit different. And most of the filming is Prague or in the UK, in fact.
I was going to say, it's really great around the Prague scene, because when the team are getting killed and you've got crews running everywhere, as which becomes becomes his like go-to thing now. But it makes those scenes where he's running really interesting. Like Smith talks about the way Brian De Palma shoots stuff. You've got those staircases, the cobbled streets, as we've already mentioned. And it allows you, rather than just being a flat street, like when the car explodes, he's running to, go to John Voight's wife, who he believes is in the car with, and she gets, and you just see the car explode. And Tom Cruise, if I remember rightly, he's at the top of like this staircase, like this 3-tiered stair, and it just looks really great the way it's shot. The one that made me laugh every time I see it is Emilio Estevez's, because the weird thing is, right, he's going up and you think, he's going to be crushed, right? He's going to be crushed when
he's on the top of a lift.
He's going up
quickly, basically.
For our American listeners, he's on the top of an elevator and he's going up. And Yes, on lifts they have those things that prevent the lift from, hitting the ceiling, and likewise on the floor. It's like a cushioned kind of thing. Not a cushion, a giant cushion. but the weird thing is, this random evil spike comes down specifically, and Emilio Estevez just decides to look at it for about 3 seconds as he's impaled on it. It's like...
straight in the eyes as well.
And it's definitely done for shock, and it just feels like the only shot in the film that I would really...
It feels quite out of place compared to the other action.
It feels like a very moments. 80s gore.
When I first saw that, I was like, what the fuck?
Do you fancy sending us a film to review, or letting us know your thoughts on a film that we have discussed? All of your comments will be read out in our end of season leaderboard episode. Email us on offradarpod@gmail.com. Tweet us at offradarpodcast. Message us on Facebook. All links and info in the description down below.
Do it! Do it!
Even the first time I watched this, and anybody listening doesn't know, spoilers, as there will be in this, obviously in this film. There are a couple of deaths in air quotes where they just seem a bit like John Voight. He's bleeding, and he's like, "Oh, Ethan," and he just
falls off a bridge,
falls off a bridge. River. But we don't. He just says like they're chasing me, and they shoot
from this
it really
weird POV kind of like looking down at the hand.
Yeah, he's like, "Oh, my ketchup packet has spilt," and then you've got his wife, the crazy beautiful woman who just seems to be like not. She seems to just keep giving looks of like, "I'm not all I appear to be." I don't know why I just went into hello territory, but she's like,
did.
I did like, good morning. But yeah, she seems to be very untrustworthy from the beginning. But that said, when the team is off, it is really quite like, oh wow. And then, not to jump ahead, but we get that one of my favourite scenes of the film is, and Smith talked about it before, or hinted at it, is the meeting with I guess it's like, one of the...
Is this the fish tank scene?
Yeah. It's not the handler. He's almost like he runs the CIA.
He runs the CIA. But it's that they're having that conversation, and the camera shots, the close-ups, the low angle. You just don't get that in modern films. It's so good because it amps the tension. It makes you think, who are we supposed to trust? It's such a great scene. And it's so funny that it ends with an exploding fish tank.
Kittredge, you've never seen me very upset. All right, Hunt. Enough is enough. You have bribed, cajoled, and killed, and you have done it using loyalties on the inside. You want to shake hands with the devil, that's fine with me. I just want to make sure that you do it in hell.
I was just reading beforehand, they actually did that, and Brian De Palma went rogue on this, kind of illegally smashed this massive great tank up. So obviously later in the series, or in the franchise, Tom Cruise is known for doing stunts and has been.
Crazy stunts.
On this one, this was, one that Brian De Palma almost like insisted on, so that they could get that real feel of that water obviously gushing out, and it does feel like incredibly real. Whereas arguably some of the scenes a little bit later, i.e. the train thing, might not.
Well, I found it quite weird. It's like, having seen so many of the future Mission Impossible films that came after this, like. And seeing how like huge the stunts are. I remember at the start of Mission Impossible 2, he's like free climbing up something,
hanging
jumps out
cliff.
of planes and do all sorts. And it's like, he's running away from exploding fish tanks. And it was a bit like, this doesn't age that well.
No, but if you see that shot in the trailer,
it's a great shot.
In the trailer.
Don't get me wrong.
It's a great shot,
in terms of like action, it's like meh.
I think the other thing with Ethan Hunt's character is quite interesting, much like Jason Bourne's, in the sense of, obviously Jason Bourne is trying to figure out who he is in that series, but in this film we don't get that backstory to his character. We don't know anything about his life really. We are entering his life at this point.
You find out about his parents because they use them as like
yes,
apparently they're like in debt and stuff like. But that seems it seems very weird the way it's
it seems quite removed.
Yeah, very much so.
Like I didn't really get much else from who this guy is apart from being an agent. And obviously in later films, I think, from what I remember, we get even less of that kind of backstory.
Oh no! I think if anything, well, I mean, maybe less of the backstory, but in the films that would come that follow, like 3 onwards, I would say. They really kind of, because they it seems that at the start of every movie he's retired and they have to call him out of retirement, so he has to tell his wife, then his newest wife, oh, by the way, I'm a secret agent or whatever. But yeah, it's I would say, if anything, the less mystery in the future films make it feel less special. I kind of like the fact you're not supposed to know much about him. Obviously, if you're building a character or writing a script, you want to kind of build a backstory and where does he come from and everything. But in the future films, I feel that even though they're not doing the backstory, they just give a little bit too much of his, like, I don't really want to see Tom Cruise baking a cake. I just want to see him run Tom Cruise.
Exactly, and that's the point of being a secret agent, isn't it? You're meant to be no one. You're meant to be anonymous, and that's kind of who his character is.
Simple game. Is he serious?
Always.
It's much worse than you think.
We're being ambushed. Abort, that's an order. They knew we were coming. Do you read me?
I remember one of my biggest criticisms of the second one was the fact that it just gets ridiculous at one point about like the removal of masks, and you never think anyone's
I remember
who
in
they
the
are.
cinema.
It's so bad.
It gets silly, doesn't it?
They kind of did it a bit in this one as well. Like certainly at the very start, he's like playing a senator, an older senator, so he's got like this rubber face on. It doesn't look that great, and it obviously is Tom Cruise under it. But then there's a couple of moments as well, and it's like, okay, so it wasn't. And I'm wondering if in the original Mission Impossible series whether that was a big thing that happened quite a lot. And
the mask reveal,
because otherwise it just.
No, I mean the second one, John Woo was like,
Scooby-Doo.
It does, yeah. But not in this one, to be fair. I think it's just about okay, the balance for this one.
I'm sure in the second one, like, they have masks on top of masks.
They definitely do.
Yeah,
I'm sure that would kill someone.
A Tom Cruise mask and then another Tom Cruise mask, but with a tash or something. I was like, what? He's got a tash.
Tom Cruise with a tash. That's just
never had a tash.
One thing I want to bring up about this movie, and Nigel kind of hinted at it earlier, and it's one thing I love, is when, so after Tom Cruise runs away from the exploding fish tank, which I feel is now the definitive moment in this movie.
I think there are some other big scenes.
There are some pretty impressive big scenes.
Yeah.
We'll get there. But for the moment, it's all about the exploding fish tank. But he goes back into, or he gets into an apartment. I love, one of the things I really like is when he breaks the light and does the broken glass on the floor so he can hear anyone approaching. Cute little things like that. You're like, oh, this guy, he's been doing this for a while. But then we get one of those moments where it's like, oh, yes, this is 1996, probably filmed a lot in 95, maybe even early pre-production in 93, 94, whatever. And it's just the whole thing with, and it's so funny because it was like that, but emails are such a big thing. I mean, obviously they made a film called You've Got Mail, which is literally, hello, something happened in your life that happens every day now. But it's just so funny where it's like
fate is going to be the film. Yeah.
Oh Christ! But it's just so funny how it's the big deal when I always love it in films when they send an email. It's like you get the graphic of like, it's like emails were never that visual if I remember rightly. Not Netscape anyway.
Yeah, and even the floppy disk and it like there's a lot of like that kind of 90s. It's like, technology. Oh, this is tech, and the kind of green, like kind of.
He does the magic trick. He does the magic trick like a zip disk. It looks like it looks like a classic old zip disk, which used to store about 30 or 40 megabytes on.
And imagine if you were born in 2002 and you watched this film, you'd be like, man, what the hell is this?
Well, that's one of the crazy things that I sort of realised afterwards. I was just randomly having a conversation with a mate today about like old school internet, and I clocked that this was 1996. Now, if you go on the internet now, the Space Jam website still exists as it was built in 1996, and if you go on that, it is like incredible. Proper old school internet, and that's the same year this film came out, and it's like, oh my God. And like, you're right, like all the stuff that appears on screen, all the technology. I know there's like Apple computers in there when Apple was not doing very well at all. There's like a big like sponsorship thing.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it's just so old school. Like when he's sending emails to basically when Ethan Hunt gets in a position where he knows he's been set up and he's trying to find out who set him up, he ends up emailing someone called like Job 315. It's just horrendous.
The original Space Jam website is there, and it looks like a 1996 website.
It feels like I've just travelled back in time on the internet.
That's crazy.
You're going to tell me that we can find teletext next?
I think there is teletext somewhere out there online.
They brought like an one back.
But yeah, like Apple spent $15 million being in this film. It's like cutting edge tech. They had like a laptop in it that wasn't ever released because it was so cutting edge. The reason they did that was because the previous year they had lost $740 million because Apple was basically going down the toilet. But yeah, I think the one thing about this film that's kind of different from a lot of the later Mission Impossible films is it's definitely more of a thinker in the sense of...
Oh, yeah.
There's
some set scenes, but there's a lot of... Yeah, there's a lot of kind of to-ing and throwing with story and with spying and mystery and twists.
I will say this. I remember, so back to 2000 again, when my friends and I went to see Mission Impossible 2, and we all loved it because we were 22 years old, my friends were just like, oh, this is so much better than the first one, because the first one was, again, 22-year-olds. The first one was so complicated. And I watched this in more recent times, like in the advent of DVDs, I guess, like maybe early noughties or something. I never thought it was that complicated.
No.
Don't get me wrong, it does jump here and there, but it's more, as I said earlier, it's more like a red herring or two here, and not like
you don't
a
need
film
to.
where you're like, I don't understand what's going on.
And to be honest, you don't need to understand everything that's happening in this film, really. Like if there is, like you say, one of those little red herrings, it becomes clear later in the film, and they do try and kind of confuse you at certain moments. But yeah, it's not like, I would say,
the most
overly
confusing aspect of this film is when Tom Cruise eventually meets back up with John Voight's character who had died earlier.
Liverpool Street Station.
They have, Liverpool Street Station with the old classic payphones as
which,
well.
By the way, looks very new. Liverpool Street Station.
That time, with the BT Telecom phone booths that look very
yes.
like those classic 90s ones. But they have a conversation where basically John Voight and Tom Cruise are blaming Kitteridge for basically setting him up when Tom Cruise has essentially figured out that it wasn't him, and you see like visualizations of John Voight screwing him over.
Yeah.
I think that's the scene that threw a lot of people. I'm not saying it threw me now watching it back, but I think everyone was like, oh, but he's saying that, but it's him. And I think, as you say, our young undeveloped minds perhaps at those points didn't quite clock all that bit.
I don't know, you
do have to watch it properly, this film. It's not one you can like dip out of for 10 minutes, go make a cup of tea and come back. I do feel like
if you do that, get out of, don't listen to this pod. If you're making a cup of tea during a movie, piss off.
Cool, outrageous. One of the film is Wimbledon. You're allowed to make a cup of tea.
No, Wimbledon, you're allowed to like go have massive bout of diarrhea and just be like, I just leave the movie alone completely.
Despite all of that, like what you're saying, there are still these big set pieces. So there are probably maybe 2 or 3 big scenes.
Well, there's the one iconic one, isn't there?
The most iconic one, and also most parodied one of any Mission Impossible film, is the vault scene, which most people listening to this is going to know the scene where Tom Cruise comes hanging down in a big white room and can't basically touch the floor or anything.
Very, very well done.
Can't get too high a temperature, can't make any sound, can't touch the floor.
Outer room. He's coming in the vault.
And I love how the bloke who is going into the vault all the time, the way they've got rid of him is by giving him some laxative.
There we go. Back to what I was saying before.
Diarrhea. But and then obviously you've got Jean Reno holding this wire, and then there's a rat comes along, and it's really well done. But my favourite bit, and obviously the bit You guys will probably remember the sweat dripping down his John Lennon glasses.
Oh, yeah.
And then nearly hitting the floor, and he catches the bead of sweat. Well, the fact that it's so silent as well. You're so used to, pretty much every Mission Impossible film, and even when you get to the big scene at the end, so much music and action and drama. But with this, it's just all tension through silence, this scene.
Yeah. I think one of the things that kind of adds to it, there's a really nice scene beforehand when he first meets up with Ving Rhames and Jean Reno, because he's basically recruiting people who are kind of outside of the system, like formerly worked in as like agents but had been blacklisted or whatever. And he's trying to explain the job to them, and he's basically said, we need to break into CIA headquarters in Langley to steal this knock list. And they're like, this is crazy, we might as well just take on like Fort Knox whilst we're doing it. And the way he describes it to Ving Rhames, he's like, oh, how bad do you think it is? No, it's much worse than that. And he walks them through every single sort of stage, like the outer door, then the next door, then all the security things he needs to get through it. And
it's almost like Ocean's 11, which we've seen similar time, maybe a bit later actually.
Well, yeah, I would say definitely later. I think this it was just really, really well done. And the guy kind of leaves his drink in there, and he realizes he's forgotten something, goes out, and the perspiration of the glass drops on the floor, and the alarm goes off to kind of show how secure this room is, how impossible it is to get into it. So I just think it again, like, I think there's those few like big set pieces, as we said, and maybe the story in between I think isn't as good as I once thought it was, but they kind of they do add that huge amount of like iconic memory of this film.
I don't care how he did it. I want to know why he did it. You're worried about me. Why you survived.
I'm sure we can find something I have that you need.
No one sent me.
These guys are trained to be ghosts. Let's not waste time chasing after him. Let's make him come to us. Find something that's personally important to him, and you squeeze.
They do the mission. They get the disc, and then there's that great scene with where Jean Reno claims that he has the actual disc, and Tom Cruise is like, "Well, no, surely I have the disc," and he does this pretty cool magic trick where it's the old in between the fingers, makes it disappear, and he's doing it. And Tom Cruise, it's a great scene because he's doing it with all this bravado, and it's just, you get the sense that Tom Cruise, he's outwitted Jean Reno. Jean Reno goes off, he's like all pissed off.
He throws the disc in the bin, doesn't he?
Throws the disc in the bin, walks out, and then like everyone's out of the room except Ving Rhames, and this is like I think the beginning of their friendship, which has lasted for all the movies that Ving Rhames has been in since. And it's a real kind of where Tom Cruise kind of leans in the bin, picks out the disc, and you realize like, oh no, Tom Cruise like double bluffed him. He Jean Reno did have the actual disc with all the identities on and everything, and Tom Cruise gives it to Ving Rhames, and he's like, I think he says like, I trust you with it, or
well, it's more the fact that Ving Rhames didn't know what they were going to get. Basically, he said you would never have got involved if you knew what we were going to get, and that's the reason he gives it to him, because he knows that he's not going to let it get out into the public realm, so to speak.
Got you.
And I think like Jean Reno is clearly there for a payday as well. But it's interesting, like that sleight of hand stuff that Tom Cruise does. There's no special effects there. He did all the magic.
So he did.
It's really cool. Yeah.
Yes, and he was carrying 2 discs. It's so hard to keep track of these things.
And I really do like that meeting that he has in Liverpool Street Station when it's John Voight and Tom Cruise, and they're talking about the events, and yet Tom Cruise is picturing how he was betrayed by John Voight, and it's just like, oh man, this is pretty tense stuff.
I love how they portray London as well. It's raining and it's dark and grisly, and then Liverpool Street Station is it's not. It's like quite clinical and almost like a vault, ironically.
I mean, if you've ever been to Liverpool Street Station in the wee hours of the morning or during COVID, I mean, when it's empty, it is it's very strange. Like I've been through Liverpool Street like before any crowds, and it's just wow. Basically, I'm talking about like after a drunken night, and it's just like wow, this is just eerily silent.
Because it's like that in this film. And,
in this film, it's like there's barely anybody in the station.
I'm so used to London being the hustle, the bustle, the kind of manic, and you never see that kind of portrayed that much in this film.
the scene when they're in Liverpool Street Station and certain shots of Liverpool Street Station, I'm sure the implication is, which is obviously, as we know, being Londoners, well, a former Londoner, is utterly incorrect, which is, I think the implication is that you can catch that the train departs from Liverpool Street to Paris. I think that's because you see signs.
Oh, right.
Well, think about that. You've got the train thing, but in the background, you see like London to Paris signs on some of the concourse. And I think they're suggesting, because I mean, they're not saying, "Hey, everybody, we're at Liverpool Street Station," but I think the implication is, because obviously we are soon on a train traversing London. I think the implication is they went from that station because that's where everybody seems to be. That's where the plot seems to be centred at that moment.
We need your help. We are looking to grow Off Radar and release more and more high quality content. Please give us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your pod. And why not share with your friends and loved ones?
Help me help you.
We may as well talk about the train scene.
It's weird seeing this scene. It feels like I've seen this scene in so many other films, because obviously Tom Cruise on a train getting like a massive wind machine gushing against his face.
It's still I still really enjoy it.
I really enjoyed it, and
there are some dated effects in it. Obviously.
When he jumps from like one carriage to the next from the top, and he like spins around the air, it looks quite good. But
well, I think that's the thing. Like, once again, comparing, like, nowadays we're used to him not having CGI and stuff while he's doing like these effects or stunts. In this, it actually does feel like CGI and blue screen in many of the scenes, but especially this scene. The helicopter gets pulled into the tunnel as the train's going through it.
That feels like something, like I say, if you watch those Fast and Furious movies, that seems to be, I'm sure there was one I saw where it was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson holding on to a helicopter and a car at the same. It was something ludicrous. I'm just like, is he actually holding a helicopter with a rope? Anyway, but it feels that. As much as I really like it, it does feel slightly out of place when the helicopter gets pulled into the tunnel. Yeah. It's great because it creates even more absurd action, but the film hasn't been that absurd. We've had an exploding fish tank and some shootings and stabbings, but we haven't had like...
Well, there's been nothing nothing like this, because, the other big scene, the vault scene, is the polar opposite. It's a silent kind of
subtle,
static.
it's lovely. Yeah, it's very clever, whilst this is just like a wham bam, thank you ma'am.
This is a John Woo.
Well, I mean, like, it really is, but like, it's, I don't, like, let's for a second accept the fact that the helicopter's in the tunnel. Okay, right, we accept that. It's the fact that Jean Reno is like, right, I'm now going to use my helicopter blades to try and kill Tom Cruise. And it's like, oh, this is, and you got an old man, John Voight, holding onto the thing, and it's really, I mean, I think that's where the movie becomes fun. I really do like it. And then you get the gun that we saw earlier in the film, and he hits it onto the helicopter. But the money shot in this obviously sequence, which I still remember the first time my friends and I saw it. We were just, again, 1996, we're just like, that's incredible. I mean, it's still it's staged fantastically. When you look at shot composition, when that helicopter explodes and Tom Cruise is thrown, it's brilliant, because you think like, not any other film, but like most films would stage that in about 3 different shots. Like, helicopter explodes, man flies, you see him flying through the air, the next he lands on the thing. To do it in one shot, where you've almost got like your foreground, your middle, and your background over there with the helicopter exploding, him being forced, and it's I think it's really well done. And I remember that was the money shot in the trailer. It was like
it's like the end of the trailer, and then it ends with this blade coming that close to his throat, right?
And of course the guy from
The Day Today, David Schneider, and he's in loads of stuff. Schneider. He stands up and goes like, ooh, and then he faints.
That again, that's one of those moments in the film. It's like, oh, you don't need to see that. That's like a comedy moment, and it just feels a bit out of place. Where he's like, he sees Tom Cruise on the thing as the train stops with the blade on his throat or near his throat, and he just like, oh, and he faints like it's a Saturday morning cartoon. It's like, really?
Yeah, it's a bit strange. And what I loved as well about they cast like Ving Rhames as like this amazing hacker, and obviously the reason why they cast him was because if you think of like your classic 90s hacker, it's like some geeky, nerdy glasses person. They were like, how can we get as far removed from that as possible? So they did purposely try and kind of avoid those like classic tropes, I suppose. But
because it could be if they did just a remake of the TV show, which it does start like that. Yeah, it's basically a format, wasn't it? Those type of TV shows.
It would have been.
It could have. Yeah, exactly. It could have been quite bad, this whole idea to keep going with it.
A lot of the original cast was so disgusted by this film that like a couple of them walked out halfway through screening.
No way!
Well, partly because obviously they've taken a very well-known character from the original TV show and turned him into a bad guy. And that is like Jim Phelps suddenly going from being this quintessential like Mission Impossible stalwart to being someone who's like screwed them all over. Like they hated the idea of it and they didn't feel like it sort of kept the original theme. And again, I'm not in a position to say like it's for me it's up there with like The Saint and random stuff that used to be on TV on like ITV when I was growing up that I kind of maybe had on in the background but didn't really understand and didn't really pay that much attention to. All I remember is the theme tune, like, and that is like, and something else that's weird, we've talked about weird credits before. Now, a couple of the members of U2 re-recorded like the Mission Impossible theme, and that plays in the end credits, and it just sounds terrible. It's just like, it's like a 90s like amalgamation.
Well, I mean,
like,
it is U2.
Let's put some like pew pew type things in it. It's not very good. But the actual theme itself, when it's in the film, is still incredibly powerful, and I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And something we have
because they don't overuse it, do they, in the film?
No, not at all.
Obviously, the composer Danny Elfman, who we've spoke about, is a great composer, and you could feel that song coming at the right moment, but it's only a couple of times, maybe at the beginning and then in that big sequence near the end and then the end credits. Is that it? I think so.
Yeah, they use it sparingly, but you mentioned in Danny Elfman. Now, Danny Elfman, 9 times out of 10, or even more than that, 99 times out of 100, if he does a score, you know it's Danny Elfman. He's got a very, very noticeable way of basically having his music appear in films, and I had no idea.
Spider-Man,
I had no idea in this that it was him, and it was actually, I sort of looked at it afterwards. Originally, it was Alan Silvestri, who obviously did the theme to Predator and a few other sort of well-known films. He was hired to do it, did 23 minutes worth of music before they said this isn't working out. So he took that and recycled it for another film, which ties into some of the things we've talked about recently, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Eraser. So that's where that sort of music ended up. So yeah, but it's just strange. Like, it doesn't sound like a Danny Elfman score. It doesn't feel like a Danny Elfman score. Not at all. And I think the music, for me, it's interesting. There's kind of like almost that military, like drums in it occasionally, and there's obviously the theme. But a lot of it, I would say, is quite forgettable.
Definitely.
It is. It's just there. Yeah.
We get a nice little end scene with, initially with they're in London, and it's. You get like Ving Rhames and Tom Cruise just chatting, and at that point, like, their friendship has been established, and Tom Cruise is, I think he's, kind of like, well, I'm kind of done for the moment. And then there's the scene that I guess will become synonymous with all those kinds of movies and types of movies, where it's like the final scene is him getting his next impossible mission. It's just like, oh, okay, here we go again. But I thought it was a nice end to the film, because I will say this: when they made this, and Nigel probably know Mr. Trivia, but I very much doubt they were thinking we're going to do a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, seventh. Because I remember when it came out, just thinking standalone movie based on the old TV series. Definitely. So when they announced the sequel, I was like, oh, interesting. Obviously, John Woo was attached. I was like, me and my mates, John Woo, he's great. And then the third one, you're like, oh. And then the fourth, you're like, oh, wow, they're really... And then it was by about the fourth, then you're into kind of Rocky territory, aren't you? And you're like, wow, they're really going to go for this. And it's so funny because you look at that initial film, and I don't think... Well, I suppose you could do the same with, I guess, many, like Rocky. Rocky is a standalone movie, and it became like a franchise. Mission Impossible became a franchise. And I guess, like, some films are intended, well, modern films, let's be honest. So many modern films are like, we're going to start with this, and we're going to do a trilogy, and then it's going to turn into a universe, and then a shared universe, and a multiverse, and a TV series or whatever. But I do like the time when a movie like this was made, and the success of it would determine whether or not it gets sequels upon sequels upon sequels. And obviously these movies, I'm sure, in gross total must be billion dollar movies.
Yeah, I've got the new one coming out soon, and it's going to be the biggest box office hit along with Indiana Jones this year, I imagine.
Excuse me, Mr. Hunt. Would you like to watch a movie?
No, thank you.
Would you consider the Cinema of the Caribbean? Aruba, perhaps.
And what do we think, and what are our ratings?
What about my trivia, mate? I ain't done that yet.
I thought you did it.
No, that was just trivia to warm us up.
Let's have John Woo trivia, as in the sequel trivia.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm going to pull it off my face, and then it's trivia, boy.
It's Neil or Nige.
So
I don't know.
I got a few bits of trivia, as always. Like Emilio Estevez, I'm a big fan of Emilio Estevez. I do like the Mighty Ducks films. I like Young Guns. Him and Cruise obviously met. They were sort of almost unofficially part of like the Brat Pack back in the day, although Cruise left. So I think they had sort of crossover as well. Obviously Charlie Sheen being around, and I think they were in like The Outsiders together, Charlie Sheen and Cruise. But yeah, Tom Cruise spoke to me, Estevez, about being in Mission Impossible, and he's actually uncredited in this, and it's almost like a cameo rather than anything else. But obviously he does have some sort of memorable lines, as we were saying earlier. But did you know that Tom Cruise returned the favour and did a cameo in Young Guns in 1988? So if you go back and watch that, Tom Cruise is just like a random cowboy. So that's part of the reason why that happened. So yeah. Another bit of wonderful trivia is that in 1997, this was nominated for a Razzie Award for the worst written film, grossing over $100 million.
Wow.
So there you go. It did not win.
That's quite
harsh. It was nominated. So there were a lot of people around that time that thought, as you said earlier, it was overly complicated. There was like silly set pieces. So maybe it wasn't just us youngsters in those days. But Etok, you look angry about this.
No. I was just going to say, I don't think it's a badly written. I mean, if we're talking about dialogue, maybe you could accuse. I mean, when they're saying badly written movie, I mean, obviously, they're talking about the script itself, aren't they? But I was going to say, I don't know. That feels like a real stretch. Maybe they were. I'd like to see some of the other films. Yeah, I was going to say 1997 screenplay Razzie Awards would be my guess for a search. But that feels, some of the. Well, no, when you think of the films that have won Razzie Awards, like most famously, I guess, was Catwoman with Halle Berry. Didn't she go up and actually accept the I might be misremembering.
Well, I think she did. Yeah.
I was going to say, the winner of Worst Picture this year was Striptease. Worst Actor was shared between Tom Arnold and Pauly Shore, so you can see the kind of level we're working at. But worst written film, grossing over $100 million, was A Time to Kill, which we've mentioned before that we didn't mind at all.
I thought it was very good.
The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Disney cartoon.
A Disney film? You're going after a Disney film? Christ.
Is this just because they've got big budgets, I guess?
Partly, yeah. Partly because it's brain candy. So another one's Independence Day, which you can kind of understand. Like
Jesus, I mean, the comparing the screenplay for Independence Day and Mission Impossible is very different.
And then the one that actually won was Twister, starring our old friend Bill Paxton. So
I mean, all due respect to Bill Paxton, I mean, Twister I can get, but
but anyway,
I don't know. That's really
my final piece of trivia. So I don't want to leave you hanging and see what I'm doing here. Whilst filming that famous scene where Tom Cruise is hanging from the ceiling, every time they did it, his head kept just bumping onto the floor because the weight was off. So they had to put a bunch of coins in his shoes to balance him out. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stayed straight. So,
wow.
So
I was wondering how they
show me the money.
Balance.
That's what he said. And then the next film he did was Jerry Maguire.
What do we think then?
My shoes.
What are our ratings? Who wants to go first?
You do,
Anyone?
Smith. You're the one that suggested this goddamn film. Tell us all about it.
Okay, so I obviously picked it. I picked it, like I said, a little bit tactically. I was really intrigued to go back and watch this after such a long time away, but I always had quite fond memories of the film. I think, like we all probably agree on, I think the cinematography and the kind of feel of the film, I'd say probably up until the train bit. I mean, the way that is all done, I thought was really good. Like, I love I love that tension that builds throughout the whole film, and that's kind of, with that is Brian De Palma's directing, and that kind of, like we said, like that kind of noir mixing in with this spy thriller chucked in with a bit of action. I actually really like Tom Cruise in this film, and I like him in a lot of films, but it's quite an interesting one from him because it's almost him kind of merging into this figure that we're now so used to seeing as what, the other films we've done, Edge of Tomorrow and Top Gun Maverick, and, basically what he's become now. And this was the film that, set those wheels in motion, but it still feels like a bit of a cross between what he was and what he has become. I think, some of the action sequences are a bit dated, like the helicopter thing, and some of the special effects, and sometimes some of the other things felt a bit dated to me. I was slightly like, what's kind of, the over complication of the story I felt was sometimes a little bit unnecessary, but overall I really enjoyed kind of revisiting this film, watching it again. I think it stands on by itself, like you said, Etok. So I'm going to go, I'm a bit on the fence with this one. I'm going to go for a 7.5 out of 10.
Very nice.
I'm interested to see what you guys think.
Well, I'm kind of with you in that sense. Like I'm very much on the fence. I've talked about my why I like this movie a lot, so I won't go into too much detail. But it's one of those things. When I watched this movie, immediately after I gave it a rating, as I do with all my movies. Upon speaking to you guys about it, it's one of those where I've kind of reflected on my review and been like, I did give it that, but I feel that you guys have kind of brought not brought it down, but brought a reality to it, because I think I might have been caught up in the moment, because it's like, it's really good, and it's, the directing's fantastic.
I think the thing is, when you're doing the podcast, because we're analysing it more, it sometimes happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've done it before where reviews have gone up or reviews have gone down. I think we've all done that. But yeah, I really like it a lot, but there are a few little things where it's like, it kind of takes it away. I mean, De Palma's directing is fantastic. Cruise's, I think the cast is really good throughout. It is a really strong cast when you look at it, especially when you look at compared to the second one. That's such an unfair comparison. That's just mean. But but there is like Yusuf, like I said, there is that on the fence thing about it, where it's like I want to go higher, but I know that I shouldn't, because it feels like that would be a bit like I'm, romanticizing it a little much. But
embrace your nostalgia, mate. Come on,
do it.
Yeah, no. I think I'm.
What did you rate it as?
I rated it a 9.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah, so both of you, your eyebrows raised like, oh well, that is, because I came out watching this and I was like, that was just, and it was, but you digest it and you take a few days away from it, you're like, maybe it was still good and it's still a lot of fun. Maybe it's not as fantastic. So I think I'm going to probably go for a Smith and do 7.5. I think that's where I'm falling. It's not quite an 8, definitely not a 9, but yeah, I think 7.5.
I wrote down 8 weirdly, and
I've
brought it down slightly.
So yeah. So obviously our talk has lowered it slightly.
Yeah. Nigel, are you going higher or lower?
Was it Price is Right?
So when you first suggested this film, I thought, oh great, it's a chance to go back and watch Mission Impossible. I think for me, I remember like the second and the third and the fourth one coming out, and me always telling my friends, like, well, the first one's the best one by an absolute mile, because I think the casting was spot on. The fact you got Brian De Palma, I think it's more authentic in some ways. I think I absolutely love, and till my sort of dying breath, I will love the idea that they brought this group together at the start with decent, sort of well-known members of the cast, and they kill them off, and I just think it's brilliant. And the ridiculousness about Emilio Estevez and all that stuff, I still think it's great. Kristen Scott Thomas, she's only in it for like 10 minutes. I think she's brilliant. So really looking forward to going back and watching it. And I watched it, and I think started with the fish tank moment. I was a bit like, okay, that hasn't dated as well as I kind of remembered. And there was just like little shots and little lines and little bits. And I kind of got a bit of Tom Cruise fatigue in this as well. It just felt really weird looking at him playing this character, but being such a young version of him. And there's something about him in this film that I used to love that some reason like it grated me a little bit.
Oh wow.
And I don't know whether it's the Scientology fact, because I still love him in loads of other films from like this period and before. And like the ridiculousness of the story, the John Voight, you can see that some elements of it were kind of put together more as set pieces with like flimsy bits kind of tying them together. Like so all of a sudden they're in London, all of a sudden they're back in Langley. There's no explanation how they got there, no explanation of why the fire trucks suddenly show up. All these like weird things that kind of happen. And Emmanuelle Béart's character just being, again, like the motivation, like why are they screwing him? How did she get convinced? And then she just randomly gets shot. Like Reno playing like a really strange bad guy in it. And there's kind of more it went into it. I was a bit like, I'm quite surprised that I'm not enjoying this as much as I did. Because I honestly thought when you pitched this, I was like, my hardest decision is going to be, is this going to be an 8 or is it going to be a 9? And I watched it and I felt a bit deflated afterwards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I was a bit like, that's nowhere near as good as I remembered it to be. And I'm actually going to give it a 6 because that's how disappointed I was. And again, I think a lot of that comes down to the ending, and this may be a common occurrence with Tom Cruise films. Apologies to those who thought I was harsh on Edge of Tomorrow or Live, Die, Repeat or whatever on earth it's called. But I think like from the scene of the frankly brilliant scene of the room where he dangles down and does all that amazing stuff, it just goes off a cliff for me. And yeah, it just doesn't. And the whole subplot with his parents, it's like so throwaway. And there's so many little bits that are just like, that was just a device to get from A to B. It didn't even really work that well. And then, yeah, the U2 like Mission Impossible theme at the end just pissed me off. So I think that's what really brought me down. But yeah, I'm only going to give it a 6. And I'm quite disappointed in myself because this is one of those films from my youth.
I don't think I've ever seen you so despondent giving a rating. Because it's almost like you feel like it feels like you've come out of it's like you've betrayed the film in some way. It looks like you're like,
I'm just annoyed with Smith for making me go back and watch this because it used to have a happy place in my head and now it's like a little bit of a sad place. So thanks, James Smith.
Well, next time we're doing Mission Impossible 2, which you'll give 9.
Well, I'm about to pull off my mask and reveal I'm actually Dougherty Scott, who's going to say Mission Impossible 2 is much better. That's the worst Scottish accent I've ever much better.
And what do you think of Mission Impossible, the first one? Get in touch. Email us.
What did you call it earlier, Smith, before we started to record this?
MI1.
Fuck off.
What do you think of MI1? Email us on offradarpod@gmail.com. Tweet us at offradarpodcast. Get in touch. Email Nige personally with MI1 in the subject.
Or just go to the Space Jam website instead and have a whale of a time.
I'm going to have a great time.
We'll speak to you next one.